Welcome back, everyone, to Business and Life Stories with James and Mike. This week we have Ethan Mayers. Most of you know that name. If you don't know that name, now you do, and you need to look him up on the LinkedIn connection that we have down below this broadcast. Ethan is currently CEO of Future Proof Agency. He's mentored startups in 20 countries. And he's done way more stuff than most of us have ever thought about. So if you guys want to hear from somebody that really knows the startup scene, Ethan's the guy. So welcome, Ethan.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for such a warm and welcome introduction.
So one of the things that was really interesting last time I spoke to you was that you didn't start out being this sort of, big force in the startup and mentoring world and private equity. You started with a career in what? TV production?
I even started before that. I went to college originally for a degree in engineering physics. I was convinced that I was going to help get humans to Mars. That was my original thought. Truth be told, the math was really hard. And I had a class that changed the entire course of my direction. As an elective, it was a class on documentary filmmaking. And in that class, I learned about the power of the narrative to shape the future, and it changed the entire course of everything of how I viewed life. So I actually pivoted from there and went into journalism, which would lead me to TV production as my first real legitimate career, which I did for six years.
So one of the things that you've written about and talked about with me before is how does story drive the future? And in our world where James and I live, there's a lot of startup companies that just struggle. And one of the things that we see very often is people saying, they take 15, 20 minutes to describe what the heck they're doing. They don't have a good narrative. So how does narrative actually help drive the future? And how do you future-proof a company?
Yeah, I mean, so we'll talk a little bit about narrative and storytelling and mythology, which is, I think, one of the oldest crafts. Before we even knew how to write, we were telling each other stories and we were making up myths and we were passing down lessons. And if you look at what myths were, they encompassed a couple of things. There were often warnings. They were passing down lessons of certain sorts, so this is part of the human culture, the human psyche. It's actually one of the things that binds us. And I will make a bigger argument that the only thing that drives anything forward is narrative. If you look back to the things that have really moved the world forward, it usually starts from a conversation, a pitch, enlisting and enrolling people in an idea, even before anything is tangible or fermented in their mind. The vision of something is what drives forward. We have our modern myth makers and people like Elon Musk and Steve Jobs, but it goes back to the earliest days. So why do narratives drive the future? Because nobody does anything alone. And inventors can do something alone, but innovation has a specific and particular definition, which is it is the application or utility of invention, which means that you could be in a garage and invent something, but if nobody uses it, Apple didn't invent the concept of a music player or a phone or a computer. They invented a unique way to package it and sell it and create a brand around it. And so narratives drive the future in every issue we do. One of the things that I say is, and I firmly believe this, I think the most powerful weapon the humans ever created, I ask people this, and people will say something like a nuclear weapon or a type of gun. I think it's the bullet point. I think the idea of societies and cultures getting behind certain myths because it's been boiled down beyond a reasonable assumption down to its essence, and getting people to believe this is good, this is bad. Most of life actually exists in the gray, which is why when someone comes along with a great story and confidence to back it up, it changes everything. I was just in a conversation a week ago, and we were talking about my friend of mine is a CFO, and their company went into a conversation with a key client, and he was really scared that they were going to lose it. And he said he watched in 5 minutes how the CEO took control of the conversation and sold and won them over and got the contract that they needed to get. And that came from story. And so I said, so what's the lesson here? Because there were some issues in what was going on. So where was the lesson? And so he said two things. One was the story he had. It was impeccable. It was good. He enlisted, he enrolled, he created empathy, he created people that actually cared about what you do. And the second one is he had full and utter confidence. So a good story told badly does nothing for you. An incredibly well-told bad story can actually move you forward, as incredible as it sounds. So you actually have to start. I mean, that's the entrepreneurial dilemma. The entrepreneurial condition is believing in a vision, a future that's different than the one that we have today, and having the courage to follow through all the turns and nooks and crannies and whips to figure it out. That's the entrepreneurial dilemma. And even when things are bad, I mean, how many startup friends do we have that are, running out of cash and just having so many problems, and you still have to believe and go into your next meeting that we're building the future. And so that's the challenge. So what do startups get wrong about it? Obviously, to your point, the 20-minute pitches. I actually had the worst pitch of my life ever yesterday at an event. It was somebody in the property tech space, and I said, "Oh, that's a really busy space. What's your differentiator?" And his response was, "Oh, it's just better." And I kind of walked away, and I went back to him, and I said, "Has that pitch ever worked?" I'm like, "Yeah, but for someone who doesn't know you," he's like, "Well, I just show them the software." I was like, "Yeah, but how do you get them to see the software? Why do you get them to care?" "Well, because people know that their software is bad." I'm like, "No, that's not a correct pitch." I think the single mistake that entrepreneurs make is when they tell the story in the pitch, they're thinking more about themselves than their audience. So they suffer from a couple of conditions. One condition is, I got to prove that I'm smart. I got to prove that I belong. I have imposter syndrome. I know that. I've been there. I have that too. But it never does you really well, because then you start focusing on your own needs rather than the needs of the listener. The second thing is that people don't understand that a pitch is an open door. It's the start of a conversation. It's the start of a relationship. It's not the end. One of the things I review pitch decks every single week, and in almost every one of them, I'm telling them to remove this slide, and they're like, "But it's essential, it's essential." And I'm like, "Right." And I'm listening and hearing how passionate you are when you're asked about it, and that's a much better unveil than sticking it in slide 8 of a deck, where you lose your passion, you lose your life, you're saying it very statically, very rationally. No, you need to, I said, what's the world's best pitch deck? Imagine a 1-slide deck that says, "I created a Star Trek transporter, slide 1. Slide 2 is, would you like me to show it to you?" End of pitch deck. You've opened a door, you've created imagination, and you've also created space. That's the other thing that entrepreneurs don't do often, is create space for people to ask questions and get involved in the narrative. So the interesting thing about narratives and mythology, they exist as a common thread, but the really good ones, each individual interprets as if it's their own. We all have this, right? We all go to a party or see a movie or whatever. Something happens in our life, and we pick up a story. And we take that story and we make it our own, and we retell it. And the essence of it's true, but it's retold in a slight way. So one of the things that I try to tell entrepreneurs is, when you're pitching, the person you're pitching is typically not the main decision decider. A lot of people are pitching to analysts that need to go to partners. Sometimes they have to go to the investment committee. And this happens in my job, in my consulting job. I'm often telling executives that then have to go to the board of directors with something. So even, in our conversations, we have to then retell it. We have to re-speak the narrative. And it's that propagation of narrative that starts getting people enlisted and enrolled in what the life is. So if you want to talk about these great big changes of life, it starts from a confident vision and story, giving people the least amount of information so they can hold it on their own, not trying to impress them, but trying to enlist them, bring them along in the journey. And your goal in any pitch should be twofold. One is to start a conversation, and 2 is that they can actually repeat the essence of your story to someone else in an excited manner after. If you've achieved those 2 goals, you've done it.
And it's just such a great way to put it. James, what do you think? Have we heard anybody pitch that way yet?
No, and it's very close to my heart, Ethan's story. A bit of a sidetrack here, a bit of a little personal story, but for a number of years, I homeschooled my children, and that was through a philosophy or a school of thought that involved a lot of stories, and those stories were age dependent. You obviously start with the fairy tales, and then you would go to King Arthur, and perhaps, and then we incorporated the Norse legends, and then that obviously leads onto the classical ones. And at the time, I was going through some challenges as well, and the more that I sort of enveloped myself in these stories, I came to the realization that you just explained there, that stories within our DNA, and for me, it is part of being human. And what I felt, what you've just related is, and I had never made that connection of how story translates into startup and tech. Now, we all know that from a marketing perspective, the best marketeers can release material or content to 10,000 people, but every one of those 10,000 people feels that it's speaking to themselves. And that, relating that back to your last comment about myths, we all know the classic myths, and there is a general theme, a general pattern, one would say. But what I experienced, and I think what a lot of us experience when we allow ourselves to go to those places within stories, is we can see us within those stories. And then where I feel that takes us is that for me, it gave me a understanding or a sense of clarity about where I was in my life, and really almost a way forward, which again relates back to kind of how we started this, which is the power of the narrative to create the future, right?
Yeah, I mean, the future is a byproduct. It's a byproduct of the events and actions that happen today, right? It's not a foreign land. It's an unknown place. It's literally today. Today, for instance, we're talking and we're producing a podcast. That means in the future we will have a produced podcast. That produced podcast that will be released is the result of the actions today. So that's one of the things. The future is in a constant state of progress of what we're actively building. The thing is, if you want to build and you want to get big, you've got to get people on your side. You've got to enlist people. You've got to get people talking about your ideas. You've got to get, in Startup Land, we talk a lot about ambassadors, especially in early stage. You've got to get ambassadors, identify who are going to be passionate, loyal products, fans of your product. And part of it is a story. I'll tell you, this permeates everything so much. So, we're talking about marketing. We're talking about fundraising. I'll even argue it's everything, right? That's how you're going to get talent. So you're going to do it in the HR conversations. It's also how you're going to do product. It's amazing. One of the biggest mistakes that I see entrepreneurs make on the product side is feeling that they have to release a completely fully released version. Even with all the books, even with the talk about lean startups and MVPs, they still feel, I just need that one more feature. I just need that one more feature. And what I constantly tell them is, if you're truly solving the problem, if you're really connecting with someone, don't underestimate the ability for your community to go along the journey with you. They're not expecting perfection. They're okay with the journey. You can tell them that we're working on X feature and Y feature, and we're going to deliver in the fourth quarter, and then follow through on that. And they'll become more passionate fans of you because they'll believe that you're honest, you're loyal, you're authentic. You can't do everything. You're not perfect, just like me. Nobody's perfect. You're doing the best you can, and you deliver when you say you're going to deliver. So I constantly tell people to almost scale back. It's like, prove that you can solve the problem. Get the loyal customers in the door, the beginning ones, and take them on this journey. But the thing is, they're only going to go on the journey if the narrative is right, if the myth is right, if they really believe in what is happening here and that something could be, sold and correct. So that narratives drive the future. In fact, it's the only thing that drives the future. I mean, we've all probably heard examples of businesses where great invention, the people couldn't. It's not just branding and marketing, but the people couldn't, enlist the right talent, enlist the right growth specialists, enlist this right, so they sell it, and they get others to do it for them. So it's such an incredible skill. I actually heard another consultant, so I'm not going to take credit for it, but he was talking about the importance of message market fit. And I feel like in the beginning, I've sold plenty of product without having a single line of code written. I've sold ideas and getting people on board. If they believe that I can solve a problem, I give them a realistic timeline, and I follow through on things. And it's just, I want entrepreneurs to get out of this mindset. If you build it, they will come, and get out of this mindset that, oh, we have to have a fully developed product in order to sell it. There are early adopters that if you tell the right story, they will come along the journey for you. That's the story I want to get. That's the story I want to get out to people so much.
Could we?
Go ahead, James.
Anyway, Mike. Now, I was just going to say, Ethan, can we explore and unpack a little bit about the importance of a narrative, really creating and building and building a community? Because I think that is so important, isn't it? Because I can remember Eben Pagan, a line which he was talking about was, every community, every tribe, which it essentially is, we have our myths, our stories, our legends, our heroes, our heroines, our bad guys, like the whole landscape there, which really creates a community. And then out of that, there are the features which really identify us, right? And then we also have the language too, right? Like think of a medical community compared with a traditional English legal community. One has very specific language and technology and sort of medical gowns, and then the other has very different language and kind of those wigs and like different gowns. So I would love if you could to maybe just unpack the importance of the narrative to create a community, to build it, to nurture it, and then, as you've said, they then come along with you.
Yeah, so a couple of things. So we have this idea of emergence. It happens in emergent product design, emergent innovation. It's the idea that people end up using your product in ways that you could not have even predicted. And it's a kind of thing that 30 or 40 years ago, you might have actually tried to engineer out of your system because you have a certain vision and you have a way that you want to be. But what you find over time is actually that creates the strongest loyalty if people can use a product in a completely new and distinct way. Look, one of the challenges, so I work with a lot of early stage companies, and I've worked all the way from basically, I call it napkin to action. So really from earliest idea to about Series A is kind of the sweet spot. And not only that, I'm a geek, so I've studied it, I've learned it, I've talked to people all over the world to really understand what makes an idea take traction, what changes, what's the calculus, the 0 to 1, if you will, what really makes it. And time again, it's flexible narratives in the beginning. So I also want to be clear to also the audience that look, when you're beginning, you're in experimentation mode. A company that is Jeff Busgang, one of the, I think he's at Harvard professor, he talks about the fact that a startup is merely an experiment machine in search of a repeatable and scalable business model. And that's essentially what an early stage company is, right? And so we talk about narrative, in the very early stages of the game. The narrative is much more about vision, much less about product and more about where you want to go and what kind of journey that we're on, and then finding the initial adoptees, the initial tribe members that know, there's nothing here. Imagine, you're in New Zealand and you're going to build this amazing ecotopia tech village. And right now it's nothing, it's scrubland, right? And so in the very beginning, you've got nothing to show, you've got nothing to offer. Nobody can come there, nobody can visit, nobody can do anything, but you got to share the vision. Imagine what it will be like when this is built. And your job in the early days is to find the people that not just that believe you, because it's not a cult, but agree with you and say, that would be great if New Zealand had an eco-tech community built for tech. That would be wonderful. And so your job is to find those people and then ask them and enlist them in ideas and also take them along the journey. You can learn so much. I mean, the real product is a science and an art, but it's also a science. It's really paying attention to people. It's having empathy. It's learning how people use it. It's learning what they use. But good leadership too. I mean, we in the startup world have the worst. We have the worst direction, right? We're told to fail fast but persist. Well, which one is it?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. We're told to solicit evidence, but then, you know, some of our greatest heroes like Steve Jobs very famously wouldn't listen to customer data. It's not really true. There's actually a lot more nuance to that, but that's like the mythology of it. Although there's something true to the fact that customers often don't know what they need until they see it, which is true. So as a leader, we're told to be data driven, but also trust your gut. So where is it? And the thing is, as hard as it is to say, and this is why I truly believe the bullet point is the most dangerous weapon ever created, because almost everything in life is actually gray.
Mm-hmm.
The best entrepreneurs have incredible instincts, and many of them go against the crowd. But I can guarantee you that every single one of them knows what the crowd wants. They're not making that decision blindly. They know what people want. And I will argue that the iconoclasts, the innovators, the ones that are really breaking the mold, for them, narrative is even more important. Because you really need to sell the story and understand people. You know, humans do not like change. You know, they argue the best startups in the world are startups in which they actually reduce the need for change. Like you're just doing a thing and you could actually do it easier, and you know those are easy to adopt. But truly innovative ideas causes a behavioral change. It's really hard to get adoption. The only thing to overcome that is through story. It's inception. It's idea. It's basically idea planting. So, you know, we talk about the power, you know, to go back to your question, James, talk about the power of narrative and the power of tribe. So an early stage company, I would argue that's actually somewhat less important, or at least we should redefine your community. So in the very first early days, you've got basically three incredibly important stakeholders. You've got the colleagues around you that are building the product, you've got your very first users, and you've got potentially the resource providers, which are going to be your early stage angel investors or other investors. Those are your three tribes and communities. And I used to, early in my career, I actually focused a lot more on brand and marketing earlier in my company, in company's history. And I don't do that at all now. And in fact, my advice that I give to everyone is you should not be spending very much money as a percentage of your total resource spend on marketing until you figure out what you're selling and how to do it repeatably. You know, do experiments, you know, throw $50 at Facebook, fine, just to understand what the results are. But I cannot tell you how many people will send a pitch deck and they're like, yeah, we're looking for $1 million. What are you going to do with it? We're going to spend it on marketing. And it's like, well, what proof do you have that the marketing efforts that you're going to spend $800,000 on? And investors will tell you right now, it's like, we're not in the business of keeping Google AdWords and Facebook in business. Like that's not our job. Our job is creating long-term value creation for companies and solving impactful real world problems. It's not to keep the advertisers in. So, but there's a lot you can do, and part of it is you know, directly to your question, so much of narrative is also listening. So one of the things, if anybody ever knows a comedians are some of the hardest working people in the world. They're constantly testing things. They're not just like smart people who just write. I mean, maybe some are, but you know, most are not people who just write a joke on a napkin and then just, you know, magically show up on stand up and then everyone laughs. They're constantly doing shows and testing and everything else like that. So what's so important about narrative is listening. Now we have better tools, and that's one of the things that we do at Future Proof, is that we have better tools than we've ever had to gauge audience sentiment, to understand where the conversations are happening, to mine the existing public data sets, which are huge, to really understand the shifting needs of conversations and really understand it. So you want to start building a community. You know, narrative building is having the right message. It's going to get people excited, and making sure you understand how they internalize that myth and what they turn it into. That other part is really important. Now, that's a little more important at a later stage, because in the beginning you need, you know, 100 to 1,000 customers and you convince some people to give you some money. But as you start scaling, that's absolutely critical to understand where are the conversations, how are people interpreting your message, what are people saying, how are they repeating it at the dinner party? You know, what would they say about you? And when there's alignment, that's when there's successful propagation. And that's when these things can enter into stratospheric territories.
So on that point, where does it come of the importance of being able to get your story out there, so your crowd, so your tribe can relate that to other people, as opposed to them understanding it at a deeper level and then maybe putting their spin on it, and then that comes back to you and you go, oh, I never thought about that. Yeah, now that's great. Because there is obviously a fine line there, right?
Yeah, it's you need people to help you in everything that we do. I mean, Mike and I, we met, we had a conversation, learned a little bit about what you do, and now I'm thinking about guests I can send you to. Why? Because I have a clear articulation now and understanding of what you do, and also more that I can help. I learned very early on. I was a travel agent for a couple of months, minimum wage travel agent. It was a very fun job. And I remember my boss telling me, and it was a lesson that I've taken my whole life. And he said, no one, and I know there are exceptions, so fine, but no one comes to work and wants to do a bad job. People want to help. People want to engage. People that are giving you the time, they want to help. Mistakes often made are you don't actually give them the space to help. I was in a conversation several weeks ago with a woman that was kind of telling me what she was doing, but she was dancing around it. And she was very much like, I'm going to keep the idea to myself. I'm going to attest to you. I'm going to see that out. And I'm like, right, but now I can't help you. There's nothing I can do. There's nobody I can think of in my network. I can't give you advice. I can't. Now, maybe you don't need it. I'm pretty sure this person does, because they're an early stage person. This is the second time I've seen them in a year, and they kind of gave me the same pitch, so it's not moving forward. So you talk about in the beginning, it's never too early to start. I mean, I'm just using the example of wanting to create an eco village in New Zealand, because my friend's actually doing one of those in Chile. And so the thing is, when you start having conversations, say, even at the early stage, I'm thinking about doing this, I might say, oh, James, let me connect you with my friend. It's the connections that happen. We're all connected. The biggest thing, if I had one message to say, we've got to reclaim and retake technology, product, and business and reframe it in the human context. We serve each other. Yeah. Like, full stop. We serve each other. Narrative and mythology is a tool that we can deploy to get somebody interested and discover and engage what you're doing, so that you can see points and areas of collaboration and how to help each other. Imagine two people coming together with really good stories, and I tell you a little bit about what I do, you tell me what we do, and then the next point of the conversation, so how can we help each other? What do you need? So it's message development's hard. It takes a long time. It also moves a lot. It should be flexible. It's not inflexible. That's another mistake that people make. But when you get the story down, succinct and short, and that's the key. The space is there for conversation. The space is there for collaboration. The space is there for interpretation. The space is there for learning. Then you're hitting it. Then you're hitting it well.
Mike, what can we say? Ethan,
you look speechless, James.
We are coming towards the end of our time, and I'm very aware of how valuable your time is, and I just felt that was a fantastic point to maybe begin to kind of bring things to an end. Mike, I've done most of the speaking. Have you got anything which you'd love to add?
Ethan, I feel like every conversation I have with you is far more valuable than anything I learned during my 3 degrees of college. And wow, man, thank you very much for being here. What kind of people should approach you? What kind of entrepreneurs are you? Is there anybody you're looking for, or or how do people reach you? Would it be through LinkedIn?
Yeah, no, and thank you for the kind words, and I also feel the same. I hope it's not one way. It should be mutual and collaborative, and I'd love to have another one of these games because I want to explore. I mean, there's a lot with education and the fact that the homeschooled, and I'd love to understand the effects and impacts of the mythology and which one's connected and which one's landed. Yeah, so I serve basically two audiences. So we scout for a lot of technology. So startups, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, which I believe you'll have a link for, and I'm happy to do that. I'm generally happy to review a pitch deck on a live phone call. Can't guarantee it, obviously, depending on the schedule. I'm traveling so much, but I'd like to do it and help and see if there's an area or point of collaboration and just get on the radar and see what we could do. And I love making connections. And then also on the other side, right? So we also serve a lot of corporates trying to interpret what we call cumulative disruption. So it's all the massive transformations that are happening in their markets and their products and their business models, both not only in their industry, but often in adjacent industries that are starting to spill over. And we help make sense of it. So we turn it into insights, and we turn risk management into opportunity discovery for the future. So that's also another area of focus for Future Proof.
That's such a great quote. I'm going to use that quote. You said turn risk management into opportunity discovery. Wow, that's such a great way to say it.
Yeah, and there's two types of risk, right? So there's known knowns and there's unknown knowns, right? So there's the stuff you're caring about, but there's also a lot of stuff that's probably right around the corner. And a lot of companies don't have this is just so they're busy in their day-to-day, they're putting out fires and they can't see what's around the corner. So all of that, and you realize, like, once you realize what's coming at you, you can actually do something about it. And if there's one lesson to in life that I think transcends entrepreneurship, life, fatherhood, I'm a father of 3 children, we're in control of a lot more than we think. Everything that you see in life, everything, the big stuff, our governments, the little stuff, the myths, how we teach our children, what mic I'm using right now, it was all human-built, human-centric, built by others who had to make choices given limited time, limited resources, limited environment. And they may, in the best environment of the time, and they may or may not have been right. So you don't have to necessarily accept things exactly as they are. And what I mean by that is, so you can have conversations, you can change the narrative, you can start saying, why don't we do this? You can start thinking about different ways. And I tell that within entrepreneurs. Like, yes, you can listen to all the advice and, of how to write a pitch deck and all of this. Ultimately, the best one to do is the one that you're going to be most authentic and passionate about. That's it. Be true to yourself, and it's okay to chart your own path, because that's what the future is all about. The future is a place that does not have written. It does not have to look exactly like it does now. It actually could look completely different. And that it's up to us today to act thoughtfully to create the future that we want for tomorrow. And that's how you turn risk management into opportunity discovery.
Oh, man, that's such a great quote to end on. Thank you for being here, Ethan.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Ethan. Thank you.